Hey guys, today I have a bonus video for you. You know, our typical video usually mimics something like forgotten weapons. We like to show you historical guns and a little bit of history, but today's video is more like Mark Felton's channel. If you ever watch that, I love the way he just shows us quirky pieces of history that I never heard of. Now, if you're like me, you're obsessed with the news lately with the invasion of Ukraine, and you probably think to yourself, it's amazing how history repeats itself. And that certainly is true in terms of 1939, the invasion of Poland, even the dive bombers destroying the cities. Today we have the invasion of Ukraine with missiles hitting apartment buildings, destroying cities, and you say to yourself, I can't believe how much history repeats itself. Now you're probably thinking, Tom, we know all that. Tell me something I don't know. So here it is. Here's a lesson from history that I learned just recently. So looking back to 1940, we know that England was pretty much all alone in the European side of World War II. They, of course, Churchill, of course, asked Roosevelt for help. And while we were very sympathetic to the fact that England was being attacked and bombed and really needed help, we were very sympathetic, but the majority of Americans did not want to get involved in another European war. We all also know that there was a Lend-lease program, and we have sold a lot of guns that went to England during this period, 1940, early 1941. We sent what we called defensive weapons to England to help them defend themselves because we did not want to violate our neutrality. Obviously, if we violated our neutrality and sent offensive weapons to England, then Germany might declare war on the United States. And that was a tightrope that the government was trying to walk then, just as NATO tries to walk that tightrope today. Now, going back to history, let's take a look. I know we sent them M1 Garands. We have sold a couple. In fact, last week we sold this one. These typically have British proofs. They typically are early 1940, 1941. Some have been later altered, but these are a part of history and part of the Lend-lease program. We also sent them 1911s. We have sold several with British proofs as part of the Lend-lease program. And in fact, if you ask for a factory letter, it will say Lend-lease to England. Also some revolvers, and I'm sure other weapons. Now today, NATO has the same dilemma, but instead of these arms, they're sending them javelins and Stinger missiles. But when it comes to asking for MiG fighters, the NATO has said, no, that's a bridge too far. If we do that, we might be violating our neutrality and therefore provoking Russia. And again, probably the majority of the people in the NATO countries don't want to get involved in a war with Russia. So how did Roosevelt solve this problem? Well, here's what Roosevelt did. And if you know somebody in NATO leadership, maybe you want to send them this video because this is how Roosevelt handled it and was news to me. So in 1940, the British were looking for fighter planes and bombers. Of course, they were being bombed and they were defending their homeland, and they expected to be invaded by the Germans in 1940 and early 1941. So they asked Roosevelt, can we have fighter planes and bombers? And Roosevelt said, that's going to get us into trouble. He said, we can't send them to you. So Churchill says, okay, why don't you send them to Canada? Canada was allied with England, and actually were sending over some of their own fighters and pilots to help in the war. Said, why don't you send them to Canada? And Roosevelt said, once again, I'm afraid that's really going to upset the apple cart. We can't have any connection with sending them to an English ally that's going to then send them to England. So he said no to that. So this is the plan that Roosevelt came up with. He flew fighter planes to just below the boundary with Canada, basically 1 mile from the border. He flew planes. He then emptied the gas tanks. Now, that's part of history. I'm not sure. I have a guess on what that's about. But he emptied the gas cans, and then the British and Canadians came and dragged them across the border, rolled them across the border, using, there's a picture here of a truck, and you actually see the Canadian flag, the Royal Mounties standing there with a line right where they crossed the border. They have photographs of the event. Again, empty the gas tanks. So I believe they can say these are non-working planes and we didn't give them to them. They came and took them. So ingenious plan. Took them across the border, and then of course the Canadians and the British were able to transport them to England, and they were used in the war. You can see we sent bombers and also fighter planes, and today we're talking about MiGs and keeping our distance in terms of direct involvement. So it's history repeats itself in amazing ways. Here's an actual video of the event as it happened.
We're at one of the world's few unfortified frontiers between Canada and the US. Canadian troops guard their side as another batch of American-built bombers is coming over to help us in the war. Under the neutrality law, no US pilots may fly into Canada and no Canadian may fly in the US. So there's nothing for it but to tow the planes over the line. But that's as good a way as any as long as we get the planes. Once they're over, Canadian pilots fly them to the bases. So it's thanks again to our American cousins.
Hey, thanks for watching. This was a little bit out of the ordinary, but I hope it made you think and entertained you a little bit. And again, if you know somebody high up in government, Alex, this is your opportunity. If you know somebody, pass it along. Might be a good idea.